So we watched the second episode of True Love, which was called Paul,
Yeah,
which followed
and funny enough, is from the perspective of Paul.
weirdly.
Yeah,
Actually, we didn't really point that out in the last video that
yeah,
we had. Each episode
is
is
named
named,
after the particular character who you follow through the story.
yeah,
Although in some of them, it's a bit more balanced as to who you see.
yeah. So it's kind of this one is weighted more towards Paul, but
Yeah,
it's
you
you're watching a relationship between
Paul
Paul and
and
Michelle.
Bella, who is the sister of Serena from the first episode. So that's all like the connecting tissue for this one.
Yes, there isn't really any more
Yeah,
connection there apart from the Margate
yeah,
connection, but this story it kind of starts off with showing Michelle and Paul in a quite confined flat
yeah,
with their baby Scott, I think the baby's
yeah,
called, which I would say is they probably less than a year old,
yeah,
maybe a bit older, but and it's quite clear that they're living quite a mundane life.
yeah.
That it's very much Paul goes to work and doesn't
Very,
really.
very traditional in that
Yes,
the man works, the woman is at home looking after her baby.
yeah, it's very very clear that that's the setup very quickly, and they're not really talking to each other
Yeah,
very much. It's very basic. Good
yeah,
morning.
yeah,
Have a good day at work. See you when you get
yeah.
back. Not unpleasant,
No,
just mundane.
yeah,
And it shows Michelle. It kind of clips between Michelle looking after the baby, him
yeah,
walking to, sorry, driving to work,
yeah,
and as he's driving to work, he almost dangerously
yeah.
looks at a woman that is at a
Bus stop.
bus stop, and then it gets to him going to
Yeah,
work.
and it's essentially playing on the idea of love at first sight for him.
Yeah, yeah, and she kind of ever so slightly looks at him,
Yeah,
but not so much on that first time.
yeah,
But he's definitely interested,
yeah.
and um,
Because nothing is wrong. I can't remember if there's any establishing shots of it before. There's the incident at the bus stop, but whenever it shows them together, it's always showing him off to one side of Michelle and Scott. So it's like he's looking after Scott and he's just off to the side and
yeah, even when they're
yeah,
together,
very distant.
yeah, even when they're together, it's very much she's a mother, he's a father that is separated from the
Yeah,
situation
yeah,
slightly.
very,
As we've
yeah, very much playing on the idea of a distant father who isn't really.
has no connection,
Yeah,
and she seems sort of mildly depressed, I would say.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
not
and
majorly so, but there's
yeah, and
definitely a
it's
sadness there too.
yeah, and it might be that because this is one of the things that I was thinking whilst watching is that it might be that she actually has a quite close relationship with Scott, but it doesn't appear like Paul does, and so that is
Yeah, which could come from the fact that he's
yeah,
going out to work every day,
yeah,
she's at home all the time.
yeah,
It does feel very much like she's trapped within
yeah,
this very small flat, whereas
yeah,
he's getting out. But when he's getting out, he's not really doing much apart
yeah,
from he has a jovial relationship with his work colleague,
yeah,
where he sort of implies he had a good night with his wife.
yeah,
He's laughing about it, but it's because he went into work smiling, which was obviously
yeah,
something he doesn't usually do.
yeah. And so his colleague assumed it's because of the previous night, when in actuality it's because
The bus stop
yes,
and who was in it.
yeah,
So it kind of then goes backwards and forwards, to showing their
yeah,
life, doesn't it? Where and
yeah,
he comes home and it's just a conversation. He's trying to have more of a
so,
conversation and a bit of intimacy with her.
yeah, but he's doing it in a very clumsy
It's very
way.
haphazard. Yes,
Yeah,
definitely very haphazard, and you can tell he's getting frustrated by it, but not outwardly so.
yeah,
It's very it's an inward thought process that he's
yeah.
having, and he does try. I can't remember exactly
There's
how it is, but there's a
there's one moment where he does actually try, but it's very much you're not doing this. I'm trying to do this.
yeah,
I'm the one trying to make the relationship work. You're not. Why aren't you doing it? Whereas
yeah.
it's much more.
Yeah, and that conversation that night as well. I'm sure he tries to touch her, and she kind of
Yeah,
just goes, sort of, "What are you doing?" But without saying, "What are you doing?" But not.
yeah,
No, I don't think it's sexual. I think he wants to just hug her,
yeah,
and she just says, "Well, what do you want for dinner?"
yeah,
And goes straight into a conversation about that.
yeah,
So that's very clearly making the point of I'm housewife and I
yeah,
want to look after you, but
yeah,
I don't really want anything else,
yeah,
which made us question whether it was possibly postnatal
yeah.
depression that she was suffering from. You've had a look, and it's not.
It's not implied that it is. It's more implied that she is just consumed with looking after a baby, and therefore her attention isn't on him. And from what they've said, that the point with that episode is that the he's someone who needs someone to be attentive. So in a sense, he's a bit. I suppose you could say he's a bit of a man child in that he's someone who needs everyone to be completely focused on him and giving him their full attention.
Yeah, which this is the first episode within it, and this kind of runs a little bit more through it.
Yeah,
Is that men aren't depicted
yeah,
very well? I
yeah.
think
There's
in this.
only two men who are kind of depicted in a positive light, which is Adrian, who's
The
episode
last
five,
one, yeah,
and Nick, who's episode one.
yeah,
The rest of the men in it are generally,
quite stereotypical in there.
yeah, very traditional men.
Yeah, so either very jokey around women and
Yeah,
joking about going out with women and the
yeah,
sexualization of women to an extent, or that they're very, I need to be looked after
yeah,
by my wife.
yeah,
That's kind of how
yeah,
that men are depicted in this, which is an interesting take
yeah,
on it, and again, probably something that wouldn't happen so much now,
yeah,
but
yeah.
back in 2012,
And particularly in a place like Margate, you can imagine that happening because of how rough the
yeah,
place is in
and
Margate.
especially this bit because Paul and Michelle do live in. From my understanding of Margate, it is rundown
Yeah,
area. I know the flats that they live in. It's not the high rise, but it is
yeah,
a group of flats that I know of, which I would expect that kind of
yeah,
family to be living there. Um, and then it kind of has a lot of backwards and forwards then from mostly just showing Michelle at home looking
yeah,
after Scott and
yeah,
him coming home but
yeah,
going to work. But every time he goes to work, he's going past and seeing
yeah,
the person that's at the bus stop.
yeah.
Um,
And it eventually culminates where I think Michelle's walking up,
yes,
and it basically compliments and all the things slowly come to the surface where he's not really been
he's basically asking what's wrong, isn't he?
saying, "What's wrong? Why aren't you doing this?" Uh, and I'm putting all this effort in, and you're not
Yeah,
doing anything back. Whereas, like, you're both not really putting effort in, so it's like,
yeah.
uh,
And he says, "Give me a minute."
yeah,
And then she looks at him as if to say,
yeah,
"I'm giving you a minute,"
and
and
then he says nothing,
then it
and
says
then he
nothing and
goes,
stops.
and then yeah, because there's a grain rack, and at one point it hits
Hits
that,
the balloon out. Yeah, he's kind of like, "Give me attention, give me
yeah,
attention, give me attention." Oh, you give me attention. I now don't know
yeah,
what I want from this attention. Is probably coming from the fact that they're
yeah,
so disjointed.
yeah, which is why I think in many ways he he kind of appears to be very much like a man child in that he's not managed to grow out of that childish need for attention.
Yeah, it is like a toddler going at
Yeah,
him, "Mummy, mummy, mummy, mummy." Oh
yeah,
well, now I don't want you because
yeah,
I've got that. I've had a hug and that's it. I don't need
yeah,
any more. But kicking up a massive fuss about not
yeah,
getting it, rather
which,
than having an adult conversation about it, because
yeah,
there's no adult conversation at any point really
yeah,
until well, even the conversation I have later isn't adult, but we'll
yeah,
get to that later.
yeah.
What we
Because I was going to say that in some ways you could argue that his man-child nurse actually is more of a response on his side to the distancing of the relationship, and so if I have her attention, we'll go back together.
yeah,
Which is a very primitive and very if you are someone who if you are someone who your relationships require the other person within that relationship to be giving you loads of attention. It
yeah,
is the way you're going to think is, oh, as soon as I have their attention again, everything will be fine.
yeah, and then not really picking up on the fact
Yeah,
that it's not making it
yeah,
fine. You need to do more than that. You
yes,
need to actually have an open
yeah.
conversation.
It's a very almost narcissistic tilted.
Yes.
Relationship.
And almost from both sides,
Yeah,
because she's also living very much in her life,
yeah,
wants him to be home, as we find
yeah,
out later.
yeah,
She wants him there,
yeah,
but it's kind of like they just want to be there for the mundanity, and both of them
yeah,
have to live in that mundane life.
yeah. It's essentially like both of them want the other to be in their lives, but don't know how to express it.
Yeah, and don't know how to have a relationship, I
Yeah,
suppose. Then he eventually he stops and he writes with he goes down to the beach, doesn't he, and
yeah,
picks up a is it a shell he picks up, I
I
think,
think
or
so. Yeah,
and writes "Meet me wherever it was," which was by the sea
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
And he then goes and meets her, and they start building a relationship.
yeah,
Um,
I,
Michelle starts getting concerned because he's out
yeah,
quite a lot. So
and
he's
uh, it shows their relationship developing. Like they're going out to places together.
doing all the things that they're obviously not doing anymore.
Yeah,
Is what is what's happening there, isn't
yeah,
it? He's having what he wanted as
yeah,
obviously wanted with Michelle,
yeah,
and they fall in well. He falls in love with her
yeah,
with the person that he's having the affair with.
yeah,
And she says she's fallen in love with him,
yeah,
and it sort of builds like they're going to. I kind of felt like Paul was going to leave
yeah.
Michelle, um, but during one sexual encounter
Encounter.
that they're having,
Yeah,
it does feel rather strange that conversation straight away.
yeah,
And I don't know if that's because the time we live in now, where there's a lot of scamming going on.
yeah.
That
Because uh, and set up what you're kind of alluding to. After they've had one of the liaisons, uh, she says to him, something's happened with her role and she's in a load of debt and
yeah,
she needs £5,000.
yeah,
And uh, so what he then does is he goes into the family savings, which is £8,000,
yeah,
and uh, gives her £5,000, and she gets on a train and she says, "I'll ring you when I get to my mum's."
and he never
And
hears from her again.
yeah, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah. So he's laying in bed, looking at his
Yeah,
phone, and he's not getting text messages or
yeah,
anything from her. And you can see he's getting more and more worried about the
yeah.
situation. Then he starts
And
ringing the phone.
yeah, and probably for me the biggest indication of what he's like as a character is the first thing he decides to do is he just goes, "I'm leaving,"
Yeah,
which isn't him actually escaping the relationship. It's him
escaping
escaping
dealing.
it's dealing with the responsibility for his actions, which again would be a very sort of, if you are someone who, for lack of a better way of putting it, is a bit of a man child. It is what you do. You just go, "I'm not going to face any consequences. I'm just going to run."
Yeah, it's a really childish way of doing something.
Yeah,
Going, oh no, I didn't do that. I
yeah,
don't want to explain that, and he clearly doesn't want to
yeah,
explain it. So he tells her about the affair,
yeah,
because he just turns around in the corridor, doesn't he, and just says,
yeah,
I'm leaving.
yeah,
And she is completely baffled by it
yeah,
because it's not even on the radar for her,
yeah.
even though he's been staying out and things like
Yes,
that.
there's been behaviour that would suggest that they're going apart, but there's actually been no actual either confrontation or attempt to properly do anything about it other than just half 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 attempts where neither one of them knows actually how to respond to it.
Yeah, and it's clearly a story of two people not communicating with each
Yeah,
other because all of it could have been dealt with right at the beginning had they communicated more and
yeah,
explained how they felt. And then so he says, I'm leaving.
yeah,
She gets upset. She asks why. He says he says he's been seeing somebody, and she kind of asks him to explain what
yeah,
you mean by that. So she's not even getting it at that point
yeah,
that that's what he means. Because she says, "Do you mean sleeping with somebody, seeing
yeah,
somebody?" And he says, "Yeah, when I was in love with her." And then he doesn't say any more than that.
yeah,
And then he's still leaving. So he's going to go and pack his
yeah,
bags. And it, in the style of this, it
yeah,
ends with her asking him not to go
yeah, and
and
it
then hugging.
yeah, and it just before he with his it shows him packing his bag ready to leave, and in it there's a load of photos of
Their
their
marriage.
wedding
Yeah.
and the early stages of marriage.
Yeah, and the birth of the
Yeah,
son. So he is clearly also feeling emotion about it,
yeah,
but it very much leaves it open to whether he ever tells her
yeah,
about it. Obviously, at some point, she's going to find out
yeah,
about the money, but does
yeah,
she find out, or does she?
yeah,
Does he tell her? I feel like it would have to be she found out. I don't
yeah.
think
I
he
don't
would
think
ever
you
tell her that,
no,
and I think then he would explain it.
yeah,
I don't think he would feel like he
yeah,
could do it. I think he would very much cut himself off from ever
yeah,
having that open conversation.
yeah.
But again, this one ended. Sorry, not again, because the other one did end quite
That
nicely. I felt this
yeah,
one is a bit harsher of an ending.
yeah, and it's less resolved, which is kind of a thing that goes through the really next
Two, three,
two,
yeah,
because episode 5 just kind of resolved itself.
yeah.
But and I suppose episode 4 does as well, but it's only really
Episode three
two
really doesn't.
episode two
Two
and
and
three
three,
that don't really resolve themselves.
yeah. And this really doesn't because you
Yeah,
are left with a lot of questions about how that situation is going to happen,
yeah,
and also what will happen with their relationship.
yeah,
But I think that's the point of it.
yeah,
I think it's meant to be open to our interpretation,
yeah,
so we can go, oh, that's what I want to happen, so that's what will
yeah,
happen. Um, because it goes from it.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was a little bit. The relationship was a little bit better
Yeah.
at that point, but would it remain better
Yeah.
once she found out about the money? So
Yeah.
again, it's kind of going down a real life way of doing
Yeah.
things because you don't always know how something's resolved.
No.
And you may, again, if somebody was telling you the story of that, they may
Yeah.
not tell you the full part of the story, so you're
Yeah.
left with little bits of it and
Mm.
not being able to know the full extent of what happens.
Yeah.
But this one I feel was a little bit harsher,
Yeah.
and the characters, both of them, are a little bit less likable
Yeah.
than Nick.
Yeah.
And
And with whereas with the previous one, it was much more not even necessarily psychologically complex, but there's a lot more of a personality to it.
yeah,
Whereas this one, it's partly because it's I think it is sort of leading into it is a much harsher world that these people live in, so therefore
yeah,
you get a sense that it's not as personal; it's much more distant,
yeah,
which blends it, which is also because these two people are distant from themselves, so of course it's
yeah, because they're slowly,
yeah,
they've obviously slowly disassociated from each other,
yeah,
and it does make you feel a little bit more on edge in that situation. And
mm,
because he loses his temper at one point in it as well, and does
yeah.
the dish thing. It's not that I feel like he's going to be violent, but it just
No,
feels like you're a little bit
it's
more on edge of what
yeah,
behaviour is going to happen.
yeah. It's much. It feels more like a child stomping its foot than actually being violent.
Yeah, I suppose I hadn't really thought about it, but it's more that it is that you don't know what he's going to do next.
Yeah,
You don't know what action he's going to take. Whereas you could kind of see where Nick would go with things,
yeah,
apart from whether he went to
yeah.
Canada or not.
The only point of contention, and I think even the actual plot of the first episode itself is very much that is taking the point. Whereas with this, it's much more you're following him through a series of events. Whereas and I think this is really sort of like the main difference between the two that I was trying to get to is that with this one it's more you don't know where it's going to go. Whereas with the first one, it was always like, will he, won't he?
Yeah, yeah. But again, really good episode, and a good way of pretty much taking you
Yeah,
into the next episode.
and as well, given that this aired 12 years ago, and these days now we are much more aware of people scamming people like this.
Yeah,
Whereas at the time, whether
I don't think
people
it would have been
really,
picked up on that. I
yeah,
think they would back then. People would have probably been more likely to think, "Oh, she needs help,"
yeah,
and see it as he saw it.
yeah,
Whereas I think, interestingly,
yeah,
12 years later, because scamming's become
yeah,
such a big thing, and this
yeah,
kind of scamming as well, making someone fall in love with you
yeah,
and then taking
entrapping
money
them,
from them,
yeah,
or getting them to give you money,
yeah,
has become so prevalent.
that,
I kind of picked up on it quite quickly
yeah,
that what might be what it is, and it would be interesting to know if I would have. I'm never going to know
yeah.
this, but would I
Would
have
you
picked
have
up on
picked
that? I
it?
don't think I would have picked
No,
up on it 12 years ago
no,
because it wasn't really on my radar that those things were happening.
yeah. And this is really the episode that we've all this in many ways it's kind of the episode that kind of sets the precedent for the rest of the episodes. So apart from episode 4, really, is
The
that
darker side of
they
it.
are much darker, much more. Well, you could argue that with some of them, they're not even necessarily that.
No, it's
No,
not
it's not
dark.
that they're darker. It's just that they're more complex and more socially taboo. And
Yeah, yeah, and a bit more difficult to get your head around
yeah,
what's going on, and you have to think a little bit more about them.
yeah,
Whereas the first episode was easy watching.
yeah,
This one is not so easy watching,
yeah,
and then you're going to, as we go into the next
yeah,
episodes, see that they become more contentious within
yeah,
internally
yeah,
contentious. But it's a good bridging episode, I
yeah.
think, to get to
So
the
you got
next one.
yeah, because you couldn't do the next one as two. It wouldn't have.
No, it would have felt jarring
Yeah,
because it's kind of like it has a peak in the middle of taboo-ness, I
yeah,
suppose. Then it kind of goes back to not being so taboo,
and
and
then
then
it
a
goes.
little bit more taboo.
Yeah,
So it's kind of been set up
yeah,
with some resting space between,
yeah,
and this was a bit where it was a
yeah,
build up to
yeah.
that major peak that we're
Major
going to
one.
go into in the next episode.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching our video. We are really new to this and really new to YouTube, so we're working out a lot of the kinks at the moment, especially around editing. But if you enjoyed watching this video, then please like, subscribe and comment. It really does mean a lot to two neurodivergent people who love to talk and really want to share that with others. Thank you.